All right. Well, as Lauren said, welcome everyone to our webinar today. We are presenting this from our Human Capacity and Community Transformation Center of Excellence. I'm Courtney Kohler. I'm a senior associate on the Training and Technical Assistance team. We also have Lauren Martin and Aaron Wicks on our team that have joined us today. And then Melanie Herman from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center is going to be presenting the bulk of our content. But I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction here about just to kind of ground us in the organizational standards and talking about moving from compliance to excellence. So as many of you probably know, our CSBG organizational standards, there's 9 different categories. They organize into 3 different thematic groups. So today we're going to be focusing mostly just on one of the standards. And that's going to be within the group of vision and direction in the category of organizational leadership. So that's kind of where we're coming from today. And we're really just literally doing that deep dive into one standard and one process today. Of course, it connects to other things as well. But standard 4.6 is about having an organization-wide comprehensive risk assessment that's been completed within the past 2 years and reported to the governing board. And this is mostly just for nonprofit or private community action agencies. The public community action agencies are to comply with their local government risk policies or procedures. So it might look a little bit different in public community action agencies, but of course best practice is still to have a risk assessment and do risk management. So with standard 4.6, just want to talk a little bit about what exactly this means. So first, this risk assessment, we look at it as organization-wide, not just for one group or department. We want it to be comprehensive, so not just for a function of the organization like finance or human resources. And we want to make sure that those risk assessment results are reported to the board so that there's that involvement with the governing board. Documentation that agencies submit to meet this standard. First of all, the copy of the risk assessment tool, brief narrative on how it was used and applied to the whole agency, so meeting that comprehensive piece. Also the board minutes showing that the board has been provided the report. And then, of course, public agencies need to have some documentation to show that they have complied with those local government procedures. As we talk about compliance, we look at, organizational standards. And so, meeting the minimum requirement is really what these CSBG organizational standards is about, to hold community action agencies to kind of this accountability system. And as we talk about compliance, we also want to talk about going beyond compliance, because we don't merely want to be just meeting those requirements, but we want to make sure that we are, doing our best as a network and as agencies to make sure that we are organizations of excellence. And so one way that we do this in moving towards excellence is through our Pathways to Excellence program. So we do have kind of this set of standards of excellence, which are different than the CSBG organizational standards. And so this is one thing to just kind of keep in mind as you're considering how your agency is currently meeting standard 4.6. And then how, once you're at that point, what is that next step? What is going towards excellence look like for you? And so Pathways to Excellence is one way to start to look at this. And this is kind of one way to start to dig deeper into furthering your organization. And so the difference between these two, the organizational standards were just recently implemented in 2015 by the Office of Community Services at the federal government. There's 58 private standards, 50 public standards. And so these, are, like I said, are the operational thresholds or compliance minimums. And these are mandatory for all the community action agencies. And so the standards of excellence, though, they were adopted back in 2003 by the Community Action Partnership Board. So they were developed through Community Action, just as the org standards actually were. And these 35 standards focus on the very best practices of the very best community action agencies to promote excellence as well as continuous improvement. And so these are very much voluntary for community action agencies, as they choose to move beyond compliance and pursue excellence. And so a little bit of a difference here, just to show you how the organization can start to move into the standards of excellence if they choose to. Our org standards require that the risk assessment is completed within that 2-year period and that those results are presented to the board. But when we start to look at the standards of excellence, there's 2 different standards, 6.1 as well as 7.6. That first of all require an administrative and financial risk assessment, and that should be conducted annually, so a little bit shorter time frame. Again, the results should be presented to the board, and then the process should be part of a formal kind of systematic process and part of the agency financial management manual. And then those results or improvements should be kind of trended over time, analyzed, and be included as a part of the agency-wide scorecard, which is also required by the standards of excellence to meet that standard. So it just kind of looks at it in a slightly different light. It looks at it at a higher level, at a more frequency. It starts to get into more of the risk management piece, which is really what we're going to be talking about today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Melanie Herman from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. We work closely with them with an online tool that she'll talk about a little bit, as well as doing a variety of trainings and technical assistance for our network. So Melanie, we're happy to have you, and go ahead and take it away. Oh, you are muted.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much, Courtney. It's my pleasure to be with everybody today. It's great to see so many folks on the call and participating. And of course, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart since I teach risk management, and we've been working with the Community Action Partnership and many community action agencies for many years now. And so it's certainly a great opportunity to be your partner as we look at this topic area. So just a little bit about me. I am the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, which is a nonprofit as well. And our mission is to help nonprofit leadership teams embrace risk management and actually embrace risk and get comfortable taking more risk to achieve their missions. So the contact information on the slide in front of you, I wanted to share that at the outset and remind you that if you'd like to talk with me offline, if you'd like to share an issue, a concern, a challenge you're facing with respect to any risk, or with respect to just doing a risk assessment or implementing a risk assessment, please reach out to me. We don't charge for those follow-up calls and emails, and I'd love to chat with you and try to address your issue or answer your question one-on-one. If you want to pose questions today using the chat feature, you're welcome to do that. But just know that you have someone you can call and email for help. And it's been an honor to work with many of you over the years. So you've got that contact information. And then this is just a slide showing a little bit about the mission of the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. All right, let's go ahead and look at the agenda for today. I want to start by talking about how to use a web application called My Risk Assessment to meet Standard 4.6. And many of you have already done that. You're familiar with it. So it's a little bit of a refresh. But then I want to share some additional steps and strategies that you can use to really bring that risk assessment to life. And I want to make sure I have a chance to answer your questions about either the risk assessment web application or about doing risk assessments generally, or interpreting the results of a risk assessment, bringing it to life, making it practical in your agency, helping the results of your risk assessment really improve the quality of services and the effectiveness, the overall effectiveness of your agency. And I also some risk management tools and resources, and there were some additional handouts for the session, so we'll talk about those. If there's anything else I want to do, I think that's what I want to cover. So that's our agenda, and we've got a lot of slides to get through. So let's go ahead, move on to the next slide. So this is the home page for this web portal we've created for the Community Action Partnership and all community action agencies. Access to this portal is free of charge. This portal was updated a couple of years ago when the standards were updated, and we wanted to make sure that throughout the assessment tool, which is one of the resources on this portal, there are references to the organizational standards. So I hope as you navigate this portal, it feels very familiar and you feel like you're in a place that recognizes you're a community action agency and you're subject to certain standards and you're also striving to meet certain standards of excellence and so forth. So it's not intended to be a generic tool, it's intended to be a very custom portal for community action. I hope it feels that way as you navigate this portal. All right, so on this home page of the portal, we have three icons, or tiles, if you will, right below the main image. The first icon refers you to a web app called My Risk Management Policies, which is a tool that many agencies use to develop specific policies, whether they be in governance or HR, technology, related to client safety, and so forth. So that's called My Risk Management Policies, and the abbreviation is Policies, the tile on the left. Today, we're really focused on the tile in the middle, which is the tile that takes you to My Risk Assessment. So this is the most recent version of My Risk Assessment, again, that's been updated and really customized for use by community action agencies. And then the tile on the right, Member Benefits and Portal Tools, that's kind of your console for this portal. You can log in and learn more about member benefits and resources from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. You can also add people to your account, so you can actually share the load of creating a risk assessment. You can have multiple members of your team involved, and so forth. So that's what the Member Benefits and Portal Tools tab will help you do. So let's go ahead and look at My Risk Assessment. I just want to give a kind of a brief overview. Again, it's a refresher for many of you who have used this before. But I think, sometimes when we're in and out of different web applications, it's something we haven't used in a few months. It starts to fade in our memory and it feels unfamiliar. And doing a risk assessment is not something you're doing every day, right? So it's something you're probably doing at a minimum every 2 years, but you may be doing it more frequently to meet those standards of excellence. So once you log into My Risk Assessment, you're going to see the Community Action Partnership logo in the top left-hand corner, and that reminds you that you're in a custom version of this tool. So it's not the standard version that other nonprofits might use. It's the custom version of this tool that was created specifically for community action agencies. And as we look at the screen, I've used a blue arrow to point to the word assessment, which is in the navigation bar. That bar at the top with the word starting with console and ending with FAQs, that's called the nav bar. And assessment is the tab in that nav bar that will take you to the actual assessment. So once you're logged in, we recommend that you start by clicking on that assessment tab in the nav bar. Let's go there and see what happens. So once you click on that assessment tab, you're going to see a screen that says My Assessment, and it's going to list all of the modules in the assessment. Now, you're just looking at a screenshot right now, so you're only seeing 3 of the 14 modules. And what you're seeing, though, is under the list, Risk Management Module, it gives you the list of the modules. On the right-hand side under Status, you're going to see where you are. So if you see the word Resume, it means that you've started the module, but you haven't finished it. If you see the word Review, it means you can go back and look at what you've done. Or if you see the word Begin, it means you haven't started yet. So those are just some clues to let you know kind of where you are. Now, I've gone ahead and made a screenshot which is showing the modules and the status, but I've skipped the section of the screen that has the full list of modules, and I'm showing you what appears at the bottom of this particular screen. Again, we're on the assessment page, which you access by clicking on the word assessment in the navigation bar. So at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see these 3 green boxes: Organize Report, View Report, or View Exec Summary. One of the things that's kind of neat about this web application is that it allows you to order the sections of the report in a way that makes sense to you. Now, many of us do these assessments and we just choose the default order, which starts with basics and then moves into other topics. But there may be a time when you want to feature specific first. So, for example, if you just want to run a report that has one module. So if you want to just run a report that has the finance module, you would choose the finance module and you would unchoose or unclick the other modules. Something else I wanted to mention is that with this version of my risk assessment, which again was created and inspired by the standards and customized for community action, with this particular version, we've created an executive summary option. And this is something that you all requested back when we offered the prior version. And one of the reasons is that your risk assessment report with all modules can be quite long. It could be 70 or 80 pages long. And that's a very long report. And some of you felt, understandably, that it didn't seem to make sense to share that full report with your board of directors. And so we created the executive summary to give you much shorter and more concise. It makes for a better, it's better uses to share it with your board, to share it, to review some of the recommendations and so forth. So some of you are probably still sharing the full report with your board. Others have chosen to go ahead and show the executive summary, share the executive summary. As we kind of proceed through today's program, I'll give you some additional ideas, share some additional ideas about what you might share with your board in order to meet the standard, right? Which requires that you share a report on the risk assessment with the board. So let's go ahead and look at the next screen. So this is the Organize My Report screen in the web application. And I want to point out a couple of what you're looking at is a full list of the modules. To the left, you see a column with checkboxes and the word include with a question mark at the top. So basically, the system's asking you, do you want to include this module in your report? And if you decide you don't want to, maybe you're just running a draft from the finance module because you want to talk, you're convening a meeting of the finance team and you want to review the results of that module. If you don't want to include certain modules, you just uncheck them by clicking on those blue boxes. And as soon as I click on one of those boxes with a check mark, the check mark will disappear. And when I go to view the report, by clicking the green button at the bottom, view report, the unchecked modules will not appear. So I hope that makes sense. This screen also reminds us about my status. So where am I in completing the assessment? And according to this screen, I've partially completed the Risk Management Basics module. I've completed the Special Events module, but I haven't even started the other modules. My recommendation would be, anytime you see the word begin in the status column, you probably don't want to include that module in your report, because what's going to happen is the report will just have subheads. It won't have any real content. So there's really no point in including the modules that you haven't completed yet. So I encourage you to look at the screen. It reminds you what you've completed, what you've started, what you have yet to begin, and only include in your report those modules that you've completed, all right? And you'll see the word complete to signify that. All right, last comment about the screen. The final column, which is labeled order, has blue arrows. And basically what this allows you to do is to reorder the modules in your report by moving them up or moving them down. So you simply just click on the up arrow if you want to move something up, the down arrow if you want to move something down. So let's say I wanted to include the Crisis Management and Business Continuity Planning module at the beginning of the report. I would just click that blue arrow 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times or so to move it up, one movement at a time. So it takes a couple of minutes, but it's easy to do. And again, that gives you the freedom to change the order of the report so it really suits the presentation you have in mind. All right, so that's my risk assessment, which again is a web application. You don't need to download any software. You can use it in real time on the web. You need a decent internet connection. That's really all you need to be able to use it. As you answer questions in my risk assessment, as you go through the modules, your answers are saved. So if you log out and come back another day, all of your prior answers will be saved. With this version of my risk assessment, you can have multiple people on your team assist you in completing the assessment. You can assign modules. You can do that through the console. And it's really quite flexible. The other thing you can do is you're able to look at your new risk assessment report and compare it to the report that you did a couple of years ago. So that's another feature in this version of My Risk Assessment. And lastly, if you have any difficulties whatsoever using My Risk Assessment, understanding the recommendations, involving a team, please don't hesitate to give us a call. Call us at 703-777-3504. All the members of my team are familiar with this web app and will be able to coach you and help you work through it. So we really appreciate, we've received many calls over the years and love hearing from you. When we see community action on our caller ID, we're excited to be able to help you. So don't ever hesitate to call. Don't get frustrated. And if you experience any sort of technical glitch, let us know, because the way to fix those glitches is by having people report them to us. Once you report it to us, we're usually able to fix it pretty quickly, and then the entire community action community benefits from the fix that you identified. So definitely let us know. All right, let's go ahead and look at what I'm describing as kind of these follow-on steps. After doing the risk assessment using My Risk Assessment, I want you to think about these steps. And you may decide to follow some of them, you may decide to adapt some of them, or you may come up with a different set of steps that makes sense for your agency. So I really love it when I hear from colleagues who tell me that they took what we created and it created some inspiration. It inspired them to go on and do something different with it. So I hope that's the case with you as well. So step one is review your assessment. So I encourage you to bring together a team of people with different perspectives and different backgrounds to talk about, what does this report mean? What do we want to do with this report? What are some of the recommendations that seem really meaningful to us? And how will we apply those recommendations? And what's our timetable, right? So coming up with kind of an action plan for applying the results of the risk assessment. And that's really how you go from doing a risk assessment to kind of baking in risk-aware thinking and baking in stronger risk management in your agency. So when you form this team, I think sometimes there's a tendency to just invite people who are the senior managers at an agency. And while that sometimes works, and that may be what you've already done, I would try to make it broader than that. I would invite people that have expressed concerns about risk, concerns that are related to any of the recommendations in your risk assessment report, and really use it as an opportunity to help individuals on your team demonstrate leadership and participate in a leadership exercise, even if they aren't on the executive team or on that upper level of your org chart. So one of the things you might want to do with this risk assessment that was not available in the prior version, but it's kind of a fun exercise, it's a fun add-on, if you will, to the tool, is what we call the risk ranking exercise. So the way this works is you access it through the risk ranking tab in the navigation bar. And what it allows you to do is to, first of all, select top risks. So we've created a list of 100 risk events. So these are future events that have the potential to cause challenges, difficulty to an agency. So my team looked through dozens of risk assessment reports that we had worked on over the years, and we came up with our list of 100 risks that are somewhat that are familiar and common to the types of organizations we work with. And what this tool allows you to do is to invite members of your team to participate in ranking the in deciding what are the top 10 risks for this agency. And then you can actually generate a report that shows how all of those votes lined up. And we call that the aggregation component of the risk ranking tool. Let me just go ahead and show you another screen. So under the select risk steps, there's kind of 3 steps to using this ranking tool: select risks, rank risks, and then viewing the aggregation. We took the 100 top risks from our archives and we organized them into these themes, starting with volunteer risk management, continuing out to human resources, the technology. And if you were to click the green arrow on the right-hand side of the screen, it would show you the full list, and you can choose to include or not include certain risks when you rank them. So it's kind of an interesting exercise. I hope many of you have tried it. If you haven't tried it already, I would encourage you to do so. It's a great reminder, this particular feature of my risk assessment, that people understand risks differently and see some risks as more critical than others. And people in the same agency often have a very different take on risks. And so if you're basing your understanding of what are the top issues just on your own point of view, you may be missing some of those insights and that wisdom from the full group. So in a way, ranking risks is a way to tap into the wisdom of the crowd. And I hope you'll feel comfortable inviting team members in your agency to participate in this exercise. Now, some of you might even want to include the board. Ask board members to weigh in and help you rank your top 10 risks. So that's certainly an option, and this risk ranking tool should help you do that. All right, so let's move on past the ranking exercise, and I just want to, again, encourage you to think about and reflect on what's the right makeup of a team that's going to look at this risk assessment, at the results of our risk assessment. In some cases, that team will be the same group of people who will be responsible for implementing the results of the risk assessment. But in other cases, you may have different teams. You may have a team that studies and examines and discusses the results of the risk assessment, and another group that's responsible for implementing those recommendations. I think in my experience, risk assessments sometimes fall flat or don't live up to their potential when the person responsible, the person who's has overall responsibility for doing it, kind of keeps it to themselves. Kind of a best kept secret. And in some cases, there's worry that if I share with others the results, it will make them nervous. It will increase worry about the environment that we're in or the risks we face. But in my experience, the opposite is true. The opposite is true, where when you talk about the results of a risk assessment, when you share the results of a risk assessment, what actually happens is you inspire confidence, and people feel better. Their worry goes down, right? Their confidence goes up, and their worry goes down, and that's a really good thing. It's a really good thing. People are so relieved to find out that, we've actually done an exercise that helps us understand risk so we can manage it more effectively. So step number 2 in my list, follow-up to the risk assessment, is to define your goals. So I've created an action plan worksheet, and I've shared it as part of this session and as a handout to this session. It's very simple. You can certainly adapt it if you'd like and change it to make it suit your agency. But I've created this action plan worksheet to really inspire follow-up from the risk assessment. And I think at the beginning, worksheet, it's important to think about, what are my goals? What are we trying to achieve with respect to risk management? Are we focused on reducing the likelihood of risk, the frequency of risk, or are we all about being prepared so that when something happens that we didn't expect or that we didn't want to happen, we know what to do? We've got our plans in order, and we know what to do. Are we just trying to meet the organizational standard? Is that the only purpose of the risk assessment? I hope that's not it, but sometimes that's the top goal. So think about those goals. Frequency of risks, severity of risks, likelihood of risk, being able to respond, being resilient, being effective and strong to address risk when they happen. Another goal that you might list as a goal for doing a risk assessment or undergoing or embracing risk management, is that resilience, right? To be resilient, be able to respond. I'm trying to think, there was one other goal I had in mind, and I just lost it, but it'll come to me in a minute, I'm sure. So think about the goals you want to achieve, write it down on paper, and document what you're trying to achieve. Oh, I know what it was. The other goal that comes to mind is sometimes agencies do a risk assessment or engage in risk management because they want to make better decisions. And my team, we call this risk-aware decision-making. Every single day our agencies are making decisions. Leaders in our agencies are asked to make decisions, required to make decisions. The ultimate for me is to be able to make the best possible decisions based on the information available to me. And we will never have complete information. But if I've taken some time to think about the risks associated with the decision I'm going to make, chances are I'll make the better decision, and I'll be ready to act if things don't turn out the way I would like them to. So last thought on this slide, then we'll move on. You're not trying to eliminate risk. This is a misconception people have about risk management. That risk management is all about making it impossible for certain things to happen, guaranteeing that things will turn out the way we hope and expect. No amount of effort or planning or thoughtfulness will allow you to control your destiny. There's so many things that happen in organizations that are beyond our control and beyond our ability to avoid. And certainly a global pandemic would be a great example of that. Step number 3 on my list is to prioritize. So when you look at the results of this risk assessment, it's going to seem less daunting if you just print the executive summary, but either way, there are going to be a lot of recommendations. So even if your agency is doing a really nice job on many, many different levels, you're still going to have a lot of recommendations. And so I don't want you to feel discouraged by that. I want you to take a look and realize that it's up to you to decide, what do we do with all these recommendations? Which are the ones that are most important? Some of you may say, you know what, of all those modules, there are 2 that are the most important. Maybe it's finance and technology, or maybe it's fundraising, or maybe it's client safety. But it's up to you to decide, what do we want to focus on immediately or in the short term? And are there areas we want to focus on next year that we can't possibly do it this year? The other way to prioritize would be to look at all the recommendations in all of the modules and pick your favorites from each module. So, if there are 5 recommendations in the facilities module, maybe you pick one recommendation to follow up on. Or maybe you look at all the modules and you pick the module where you have the fewest recommendations and tackle those first, or you pick the module where you have the most recommendations and you tackle those first. So there's no wrong way or right way to do this. It's really what suits your team, what makes sense for your agency at this time, and really what risks do you consider to be most pressing. So lots of different ways to approach this. I think, sometimes the flexibility that's inherent in a process like this, doing a risk assessment and then implementing a risk assessment, that flexibility is comforting for those of us who have strong views or want to, take a certain path or follow a certain path. But sometimes it's disconcerting for those of us who like to be told, do the following things in order. So I hope you're in the former category where you like the fact that there's a lot of freedom. And that it's not disconcerting to you, but lots of freedom in how you approach this. So additional things you might want to think about as you're working to prioritize the recommendations from your risk assessment would be, which recommendations really resonate, seem right? Are there any that just don't work for us? They don't make sense for us right now. And, I apologize if your report includes some that seem a bit out there, but all of the recommendations in the report are based on how you answer the questions. And so there are some assumptions built in. As my team developed the narrative for those recommendations, we have to make some assumptions as a way of avoiding asking you hundreds and hundreds of questions, right? We try to ask the fewest number of questions we could to offer salient recommendations. I also think thinking about whether there are any items on the list that are kind of low-hanging fruit, where you look at it and say, wow, that would be easy. That's not too hard. We could actually do that pretty quickly. I'd also encourage you to think about whether there are any recommendations that are kind of stretch goals that seem hard but worthwhile because you want to push your team to continue to improve performance and make your agency as strong as it can possibly be. And then finally, I want you to be thinking about who should be involved, who needs to be participating in the discussion, the planning process, who needs to be involved to implement these recommendations. I think sometimes as you get to implementation, the team that you assemble to look at the results of the risk assessment, you suddenly realize, that you need a bigger team. You need a broader, more diverse group of people to fully implement the recommendations. Step number 4 is to create your action plan. And as I mentioned, I've created a worksheet. We're going to take a look at that now. But I encourage you to think about what format would be useful. Are there some interim steps? Are any of these recommendations or steps that we're going to take, will they help us achieve other goals unrelated to the risk assessment? And some of you may take that risk assessment report or the executive summary, download it to your own network or wherever you store files, save it as a Word document, and start to edit it. Add some additional pieces to it and components to it that make it, turn it into a document that really makes sense for your agency. So I'd love to hear groups that have done that and use the assessment results in that way. So let's go ahead and look at the Risk Assessment Action Plan worksheet. So you can see it in front of you. It has the steps repeated and a space to fill in the blank. And I believe I shared it as a Word document with Courtney and the Community Action Partnership team. If you received it as a PDF and you'd like to receive it as a Word document, if you're not able to convert it back to Word, just let me know. I'm happy to send that to you. So step one on this worksheet is to really list the colleagues that you want to involve in reviewing the assessment. So we're getting back to forming that team that's going to review the results of the assessment. Now, as I mentioned before, in some cases that team may be not only reviewing the assessment, but responsible for implementing the changes you're going to be making. And in other cases, you may need a different set of people, a broader set of individuals to actually manage implementation. So I encourage you to jot down those names and the role that they play. And then on the second page of the worksheet, we invite you to jot down those goals. What do you hope to or expect to achieve through the implementation of those risk assessment results, creating this risk assessment action plan? And you may have one primary goal, you may have multiple goals, but I think it's really important to articulate those, because after you've created the plan, after you've started to implement the recommendations, you can go back and say, did we achieve the goals? And if we didn't achieve something, why didn't we achieve it? And what can we do to fill that gap? And then under step 3, I want you to prioritize. So I've listed here some of the prompts that we saw in the prior slides. What are some of the key topics that we want to cover, the modules that seemed most relevant, point of view? Is there low-hanging fruit that we can focus on? Are there stretch goals that we might want to focus on? So the worksheet should help you document all of that. And then step 4, this is probably going to be the biggest part of your completed action plan worksheet, if you choose to use this format. This is where you're going to list the recommendations that you intend to follow up on, and then the specific action steps. Now keep in mind, in your report, there will be recommended action steps for many of the recommendations. But in some cases, there may be a broader scope recommendation where it's up to you to decide what action steps you're going to take. Now, this chart also invites you to list resources. What do we need to do this? And also jot down what's a reasonable date that we can expect to have this accomplished. And then you can keep track of these action items with that status column. So if you download your risk assessment report in Word, keep in mind that you copy and paste recommendations from the report into a chart like this. So you don't need to retype all of these recommendations. And where your report has specific action steps listed, you can copy and paste those in as well. So we're trying to reduce the amount of effort and time that it takes to really create an action plan inspired by your risk assessment. All right, a couple of things that I wanted to remind you about is keep in mind that it's really impossible and unrealistic for any one of us to implement everything that comes out of these risk assessment reports in a short time frame. That there will always be some recommendations that you can take action on pretty quickly in the next few weeks and months, and others that need to be deferred to another time, maybe even next fiscal year, right? Longer term goals. And actually, there may be some recommendations that are simply unrealistic for your agency now and for the foreseeable future. And it may be that your circumstances are such, the circumstances in your agency are such that the recommendation just doesn't make sense. Give yourself permission to accept that and recognize that no one expects you to fully implement all of the recommendations coming out of a risk assessment. So, be forgiving and give yourself permission to put aside, to either delay for a period of time or just to decide that this recommendation doesn't make sense for us. It's perfectly fine. Another reminder is that sometimes the recommendations really are suited for staff action or staff follow-up, things that staff must do or can do. to strengthen risk management in your agency, but sometimes the recommendations are really about things the board should be doing, right? Especially those recommendations in the governance module. I think you're going to find instances where we're really talking about board follow-up. And then finally, there are some recommendations and action steps that you might take that will generate kind of a tangent that you'll be able to see right away, some improvement, and others that have more of an intangible benefit, right? When we work to increase the confidence that we have in decision-making and to make the best possible decisions in an environment of uncertainty, that's really an intangible benefit. It's hard to kind of tie that back to a risk management action step. Okay, risk reporting to the board. So one of the things you're required to do under the organization standard 4.6 is report the results of your risk assessment to the board. I wanted to just remind you about these 4 aspects of risk reporting, these 4 goals, overarching goals for risk reporting. The first is inspire confidence. I talked about that a few minutes ago, that when your board sees your report or the executive summary or a report inspired by your risk assessment report, the board should feel really confident. Wow, this is an agency that's thinking about risk, that's taking action in the face of risk, that is thoughtful about risk. I really expect that your board will be confident, increasingly confident after receiving a report on your risk assessment. That should be the goal. And if your board freaks out, if the board expresses grave concerns and is worried, give me a call. Let's talk about that. Another goal for risk reporting to a board is to spark engagement. So I know probably all of you not only serve in a staff role, but also serve on boards of directors. You may be a board member of a community action agency as well, or you may be a board member of another nonprofit agency. One of the things that we see when we serve on boards is a lot of reporting where there is no interaction, where we're presented with information and we're just expected to nod and adopt the report and have really no discussion. As a board member, this is my least favorite part of board meetings, is where it's just kind of a presentation made by a staff person and there's nothing for me to do. There's no action for me to take. There's no attempt to engage me in a conversation. So I want to encourage you, when you talk about risk with your board, when you share a risk report or a risk assessment report, that you think about, what are we doing to make sure it's a two-way conversation? One strategy I like to use that I think has been pretty effective is to have generative discussions right on the agenda. So when I present a risk assessment report, I might list questions such as, did the results of this assessment increase your confidence in our approach to risk management? What was surprising to you about the results of this assessment? What issues did you expect to see but didn't see, right? So posing those questions, it necessitates that the audience, that members of the board, have actually read the report or read the presentation that you're presenting and given some thought to it. And so it's not just a one-way presentation without any engagement. The next goal on that is sync with your governing model. And so what I mean by this is that many nonprofit and public agency boards are very much governing boards that focus on high-level policy issues. Other boards are more operational, where the board gets involved in kind of some day-to-day activities, right? So it depends. Whatever model you've adopted, wherever your board is in terms of being a true governing policy-setting board or more of an operational board, you want to make sure your risk assessment presentation syncs with that model. So if your board is a policy-setting, governing board, then you want to make sure you're keeping the conversation about risk at a very high level. If the board is more of an operational board that gets into and weighs in on day-to-day operations, then you want to talk about operational risks. And then the final goal in terms of risk reporting is to inform decisions. That ultimately the reason we do risk management is to make our agency safer, but to also to inform and help us make the best possible decisions in an environment of uncertainty. So I'm hoping that when you present your risk assessment results, either the full report, the executive summary, or some version that you've created, an adaptation, if you will, that presentation will help the board make the best possible decisions in this environment of uncertainty. So another thing to think about as you're implementing step number 5, which is to share the results with your board, is to think about, what does the board want to see? What do they have an appetite for? What makes sense? Do they want to see a report that shows our priorities? Do they want to see the action plan report showing the things we're going to do as a result of this risk assessment? Would it make sense to share with them an overview of how we're going to strengthen and improve risk management over the next 2 years? Would it make sense to share an overview of the progress we've made since the last time we did a risk assessment, right? So there's so many interesting possibilities in terms of how you share the risk results with your board, what you share, how you frame it, and how you engage with them. So before we move on to a list of some resources and also some closing thoughts, I just want to see if anyone at this juncture has any questions for me about risk in general, about risk assessment, about risk reporting, really about anything that I've shared. And if you'll just use that chat feature to share your question, that'll help. And again, if you don't have any questions now or any questions you want to share in this kind of public forum, I welcome and look forward to talking with you one-on-one. We can exchange emails. We can set up a time to have a conference call, whatever works for you. So just know that there's always somebody you can call to talk to about risk. You should never feel like you're alone. Or to talk to about how to use this risk assessment web application, or if you encounter any technical difficulties. Happy to take your calls about those as well. Great, so there's a question from Rita. Do you find that most community action agencies use the MyRisk assessment to make improvements or go through the exercise in order to meet the organizational standard? You know what, this is a great question. Anytime we are subject to organizational standards, it certainly increases the likelihood that someone's going to use a tool like MyRisk assessment. And we've heard from many, many agencies that they love the fact that here's a web application, it's easy to use, it's pretty intuitive, that they can use to meet the standard. And so of all the custom versions of MyRisk assessment my team has created, this version has the highest level of use, the most number of users, and the highest percentage of use among the organizations that are invited to use it, because you have this standard. So the standard absolutely is probably the primary reason that people use MyRisk assessment. But now that I've had a chance to work one-on-one with a handful of agencies, I've seen some great examples of where agencies realize, yes, we have to do this to meet the standard, but if we do this, if we actually use the results and apply the learning from the process, we're going to be a better, stronger, more resilient agency. And so, Rita, I really appreciate that question. I think there's no question that most agencies use it initially to meet the standard, but I'm seeing kind of a growing interest and tendency to recognize that if we actually take this seriously and apply what we've learned from the assessment, we can make our agencies more resilient. And I think resilience is something that we're all worried about and focused on because of the global pandemic. We want to be able to bounce back from things that we couldn't avoid. And the pandemic has been an incredible educational experience that it is impossible to avoid a lot of risks that may come our way. Thank you for that question. Let me just share a few risk resources. So this is on our list of e-news articles. We publish a weekly risk e-news, and they're all available on our website, which is nonprofitrisk.org. I hope you'll take a look at some of these articles. We've been spending a lot of time during the pandemic writing about resilience and writing about bouncing back and business continuity planning and things that are really, really relevant these days. So I hope to see lots of those resources on this page on our website. Another question coming from Elena is, would the risk assessment be relevant to agencies that are not providing direct services? And the answer is yes. You might not want to complete all of the modules. You might want to focus on the modules related to financial management, related to governance, related to HR. But look through that list of modules and only complete the ones that are relevant to you. So no, there's no question that the assessment tool can still be very helpful to an agency that's not providing direct services. Now, let me see. One more question I think I want to answer. Hang on just a second here. How does a business continuity plan relate to a risk assessment? Should we look at business continuity issues based on the current pandemic? Great question, James. There's no doubt in my mind that the pandemic has taught us that we all need a business continuity planning. We all need plans to ensure the continuity of operations when normal is not necessary, and also plans to help us resume operations in an orderly fashion, things that we had to curtail because of an interruption, such as due to something like the pandemic. So no, all agencies need a business continuity plan. You know, you can put information related to your business continuity strategies. They could be a separate document, a separate plan from your risk management resources. They could be worked into your action plan, your risk management action plan. When you create this risk management action plan, many of the components of it may be directly from your risk assessment results, but some of them may be from other activity that you've been going through, right? Looking at business continuity. We've actually been working on a separate tool called My Business Continuity Plan, which is a web app that helps agencies create business continuity plans. It's coming out next month. It has not been customized for community action agencies at this point, but it will be available. But honestly, as you think about business continuity and what you need, I would encourage you to focus on two themes. One is, what activities or functions need to continue no matter what, cannot be curtailed, cannot be taken offline if we lose power, if we face a pandemic, people aren't available to come to work, and so forth. What are those things that must continue no matter what? I would identify those. And then second, what are the things we're doing to make sure that we can resume operations in an orderly fashion? Those are kind of the two major questions that you answer in a business continuity plan. So again, reach out to me one-on-one if you have additional questions about that. If you look at some of these risk resources on our website, you're going to see lots of information and insights about business continuity planning. There's an article called No Business Continuity Plan, Take These 4 Steps. And it talks about 4 steps you should consider if you don't have a business continuity plan. So I think you're going to find some of these resources really, really useful as you look to develop a plan if you don't already have one. So an additional resource that I wanted to mention to you is what we're calling our BCP Worksheet Suite. It's a suite of fillable PDFs, so they're super easy to use. And you customize them, you answer the questions, you fill in the blanks, and you save it to your hard drive, and you've got that for you. They're all available on our website. Again, it's the BCP Worksheet Suite, fillable PDFs. I also included it as an attachment or additional handout for today's session. So I'm just going to show you quickly what's in that suite of resources. The first is the Success, Near Miss, or Failure, Lessons from Failure worksheet. And again, you get to choose in the first column the outcome, describe what you were trying to achieve, identify causes, and then most importantly, that fourth column, identify some of the lessons learned from that near miss or that failure. Next worksheet is a COVID-19 lessons worksheet. And this is a chance to really hone in on the lessons from the pandemic. And so we've created this really easy to use PDF, fillable PDF for that purpose. And let's see, there's one other worksheet, and I think I copied the wrong page. So there are 3 worksheets all together, so you can see those in that handout that I know Courtney has made available to everybody. All right, let's go ahead and I'll share some closing thoughts and then see if we have any final questions from me before we wrap up. So the first is from a book called Enabling Knowledge Creation, and the authors of this book talk about the importance of inspiring practical caring in the workplace. Practical caring. So what do they mean by that? We talk about these 5 components of practical caring. The first is mutual trust. And I want to encourage you to think about things you're doing and ways in which you are not only trusting of others that you work with, but inspiring trust, right? Trust is a two-way street. We can't ask people to trust us as leaders if we don't trust them. So I want you to reflect a little bit on that trust. To what extent does that exist in your agency, and to what extent is it strong? Active empathy is more than just expressing concern about somebody, but really working to understand where they're coming from and how they feel about something. Such an important quality. And we know that empathetic leaders are the strongest and most effective leaders of organizations. The third is access to help. I hope that you have a culture where if somebody wants help or needs help, your team is ready to provide it and committed to providing it. So important that people feel they're able to seek help and receive help, and that providing help to a colleague is a primary value in the agency. The fourth is lenience and judgment, and what the authors are referring to here is not being too harsh when people make mistakes. If we're too harsh when somebody makes a mistake, people stop reporting mistakes. They stop raising their hand to say that they've made a mistake. And so we really need to work to be more lenient in judging others. And then the fifth is courage. We need a lot of courage to run our agencies. And kind of as a follow-on to that, I wanted to share this quote from Simon Sinek, who is the author of The Infinite Game. He also wrote a great book called Start With Why. And another one of his books is called Leaders Eat Last. Some of you may have read those. The Infinite Game, I think, is his best. It's my favorite book by this author. And he talks about the fact that, the courage to lead is really all about risk. It's all about being willing to take risks for the good of an unknown future. And he says it's much easier to make decisions about the here and now, about things that are in our immediate frame or view, but it's much harder to make decisions with an eye toward the future. So I want to encourage you to think about the future, peer into the future. And I love these question prompts to help us do that. Where do we want to be? What are the factors that will shape this future? And what are the risks we need to take to get there? Just great questions to think about as you really embrace this idea of looking to the future and planning for the future. And then the final closing thought is a quote from Paul Shoemaker, which is one of my favorites about experience. And really what he's talking about is the fact that each and every day we have lots of different experiences. We all experience things, but often we don't take time to learn from those experiences. Experience is inevitable, but learning is not. And learning requires a conscious to learn from those things that we experience, good and bad, right? Risks that caught us off guard, risks that we were anticipating, circumstances and events beyond our control. There's always an opportunity to learn. So I want to encourage you to try to learn from those experiences. So thank you so much for your time and for hanging out. I'm going to turn it back to Courtney to see if there are any additional questions. I see a question from Linnell. It's, can you repeat the title of the book? Okay, so I have mentioned a few books, right? The Infinite Game is the Simon Sinek book that I mentioned, which is awesome. I really encourage you to read that. And then the book that had the 5 ways to inspire practical caring in your workplace is called Enabling Knowledge Creation. And also lots of book recommendations on our website. That's something we do all the time is make book recommendations. So check out the e-news and the website for those. And again, you've got my contact information if you've got additional questions, but we'll turn it back over to Courtney.
All right. Well, thank you, Melanie. Appreciate it. And just want to also let everyone know that we will be doing actually a virtual roundtable. So let me, if you can actually just move the slide forward once. There we go. Thank you. And so we're going to be doing a roundtable just in case there's people that want to chat a little bit more about this topic. Melanie Herman from Nonprofit Risk Management Center, she's going to join us for this. And then some of our staff at the National Community Action Partnership will be on there. And just a 30-minute time frame to come together and just bring up anything that kind of came up from this webinar that you want to talk about related to risk management, or just something you might want to discuss a little bit further. So all are welcome. We're going to be sending out these slides afterwards, so you'll be able to have that link. And we'll make sure that that is available to all. You can also just email us to make sure you get that information as well, but we'll make sure that it goes out to everyone who is on this webinar after the event. Then, of course, we do have several resources on our website related to the organizational standards, so all of those will be included in here as well. On the next slide, we have a few different toolkits, that are for each category of the standards. So, of course, organizational leadership has its own TA guide. And then, like we mentioned at the very beginning, this is part of a larger series of webinars on deeper dives to the organizational standards. So our neat graphic did not show up for some reason, but you can see the different dates that we're having for this series in the coming couple of months, really. We're going to go through November. And so those can be found on our website under upcoming webinars. You can register for those. And all of the recordings and slides from all of these webinars will be posted on our HCCT webpage, the Human Capacity and Community Transformation Center of Excellence. And we'll make sure that as a webinar participant that you receive a follow-up email as well. So with that, we're at the end of our webinar today. Of course, if you have any questions for us at the National Community Action Partnership, my information is here, as well as Erin and Lauren, my colleagues. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. And thank you again, Melanie, for presenting to us today. We appreciate it. All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.